In this lesson, I am going to introduce to you an entirely new concept. The main piece of information that we've been dealing with until now in all of our Ruby programs is numbers. We added numbers, subtracted numbers, used numbers in our variables, used numbers in our conditionals. Everything was numbers, numbers, numbers. But not everything is about numbers. After all, if you look at this very website, you can see that there's other things like words. And that brings us to the concept of strings. Just as Ruby can deal with numbers, Ruby can also deal with words and other so-called strings of letters and numbers and other alphanumeric characters. Let me show you what I mean. So as you know, in the past, we've done things like print 2 to the terminal. So there we print a number. But we can also print a word. To do so, we need to surround the word in quotes. And this word is known as a string. Let's see what happens when we run this program. As you can see, we actually get the word hello in the terminal. Now, a string is not limited to words. It can be a sentence or really any string of alphanumeric characters. So we can say, hello, how are you? And print that to the terminal. But we could also put in nonsense and throw in some numbers and dollar signs and whatnot. And that is also a valid string. So a string is basically a new kind of piece of data that is not a number per se, but it is just a string of alphanumeric characters. But this allows us to create programs that can do more than just calculate numbers. We can actually talk to the user by printing out sentences and allow the user to make choices by typing sentences back, etc., etc. Now, I must emphasize that a string is only a string if it is surrounded by quotation marks. Now, you can use double quotation marks or you can use single quotation marks as long as you are consistent on each side of the string. Interestingly enough, even when we use the single quotation mark above, when it prints in the terminal, you can actually see the double quotation marks. Now, the truth is that there's actually an alternative way to print things to the terminal. Instead of P, we can do puts. The difference is that when we use puts instead of P, when it prints to the terminal, it actually leaves off the quotation marks altogether. And this is generally the preferred method when printing to the terminal, because when we actually perhaps send a message to the user in our program, it makes sense to just have a sentence. So let's say we have a normal sentence like, hello, how are you? It makes sense that that would appear in the terminal without quotation marks, just purely as the sentence unto itself. So generally, my preference when printing strings to the terminal is to use puts rather than P. Now, interestingly enough, strings have their own types of special abilities. So just as we can add numbers together, you can, so to speak, add strings together. Let me show you what I mean. Here we take the first string of hello, how are you? And we, so to speak, add it to the second string of I hope you are well. Let's see what happens when we print this to the terminal. As you can see, we get both of the strings mashed together as one. This is actually known as concatenation. I called it adding, but technically the real term for putting two strings together using the plus sign is called this fancy term of concatenation. We are basically taking two strings and merging them into one string. Now, if you look carefully in the terminal, you can see that there is one little glitch, which is that right after hello, how are you question mark, there is no space between the question mark and the capital I that follows it. So we can solve this in one of two ways. We can either put a space at the end of the first string, or alternatively, we can put a space at the beginning of the second string, and then it looks much better in the terminal.